Okay, guys, we were not able to finish our conversation on the Constitution of the United States in class today because of our evacuation drill yesterday. So I'm just going to fly through the last couple of slides of this PowerPoint presentation I have for you. The PowerPoint presentation is also on the Google Classroom if you need to look back on it. And I would like, as you're watching this video, to answer questions 7 through 11 on your handout and show it to me on Friday at the beginning of the class period, if at all possible. 7 and 8, number 7 and 8, we were able to get to a little bit in class. Without the Great Compromise, there is no Constitution, and without the Constitution, there might not be a country because the Articles of Confederation was just that bad. So this compromise, the Great Compromise, was needed to rectify the differences between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. The Virginia Plan catered to the larger states that had representation based on population, meaning the bigger states would have more representation in both houses of Congress, whereas the New Jersey Plan wanted to model after the Articles of Confederation, just one house, each state getting one vote, which would show all states as equal, though the bigger states obviously didn't want that because they felt that they had sacrificed much more for the revolution and they deserved more for the efforts that they put in. So we needed a compromise. Without a compromise, there's conflict. Conflict was just not an option at this point, though this compromise almost failed and almost torpedoed the entire convention. We had a compromise called the Great Compromise, also known as the Connecticut Compromise, where we'll have two legislative bodies, one called the Senate, with equal representation, pleasing the smaller states. Each state gets 2 senators. New Jersey gets 2 senators, Connecticut gets 2 senators, Virginia gets 2 senators, Pennsylvania gets 2 senators. But then there's the House of Representatives that has representation based on population, meaning the more people in your state, the more representatives you will have, meaning the more votes you have and the more power you will have. That was definitely a sticking point for the bigger states. Somebody this morning in another class said, well, why 2 houses in the first place? Why not just have one house? Well, here's the part about 2 houses. It checks and balances each other, hence the checks and balances system, which we see for number 9, which we'll get to in a second. The idea of checks and balances is that if the Senate ever comes up with something where they create a pretty bad law or an idea that's not a good one, or they ever try to heaven forbid, take over the country, the House of Representatives then can check the Senate. The House of Representatives can say, that's a dumb idea, or this is not a good law that we should pass, or you can't take over the country. So the idea is that even though they're doing the same job, them doing it separately holds them in check with one another. So a little visual here just to show how the New Jersey Plan and the Virginia Plan ultimately come together to create this compromise that enables the Constitution to work. But wait, we need another compromise to make the Great Compromise work. That's called the 3/5 Compromise, the answer to number 8 for you. Because Southern states saw that the more people they had, the more representatives they would get in the House of Representatives, they wanted to count all of their slaves as a person. Northern states said, hold on a second, you don't treat your slaves as people, you treat them as property, so they shouldn't be counted as a population towards representation. That's not fair. So ultimately, we needed another compromise to make the Great Compromise work, to make the Constitution work. That compromise was known as the 3/5 Compromise, where slaves in slave-holding states would not be counted as a full person, they would be counted as 3/5 of a person. So for every 50,000 people, slaves, in that state, 30,000 would be counted towards population and representation in Congress. We'll definitely revisit more about the 3/5 Compromise down the road, but for the purposes of the Constitutional Convention, the 3/5 Compromise was needed to make the Great Compromise work, to make the Constitution work, and ultimately that's what happens. Number 9, what system did the Constitution create? One of the other brilliant, underrated thoughts in the Constitution was the creation of a checks and balances system. If you're going to give the national government more power, we've got to make sure that that power does not become corrupted by one person or a group of people. So what James Madison does with the Virginia Plan is he promotes separating the powers into 3 different branches: a legislative branch that makes laws, an executive branch that enforces laws, and a judicial branch that interprets laws and settles disputes. And with that, not only do you separate the powers, you can create a system called checks and balances where you can check and balance one another. If the president, the new position of the president is going to be created to lead the executive branch, if the president tries to get too big for their britches and take over the country, the legislative and judicial branch can step in and stop them. If the legislators, if the two houses and the legislators try to gang up and take over the country or kick out the president, the executive and the judicial branch and even the states can step in and stop them as well. So what James Madison did, which was purely brilliant, was to try to safeguard the process. However, as we go into the final stages, one of your other vocab terms, which we already talked about, was to ratify. Ratify needs to approve. Just because 56 old white guys make this Constitution doesn't mean that it becomes law. We now need the states to ratify the document. But here's the problem. The national government is getting more power with the U.S. Constitution than they had with the Articles of Confederation. That power has to come from somewhere. Who do you think is now going to lose power with this new Constitution? Ding, 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 the states. So you are asking 9 of our 13 states to ratify a Constitution which is giving that body more power and taking power away from yourself. This ratification process proved to be much harder than we thought it was going to be. It actually turned into pretty much a hot mess and 2 factions that came out. On your vocab list, the last vocab term is the term faction. A very simple definition of faction is a group within a larger group. 2 factions emerged from within our country. Federalists, as this slide says, those who favored the ratification of the Constitution, like George Washington, James Madison, who wrote the thing, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. But then there was also a contingency of anti-federalists, those against the Constitution's ratification. They had problems with how much power the national government was going to get, with how little power the states would have left. They also had problems with the fact that there was no Declaration of Rights. There was nothing protecting citizens from the big bad national government. So there was a lot of reasons why people were anti-federalists, like Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. Ultimately, though, the Constitution was ratified 9 months after it was written. In June of 1788, we did get 9 states to ratify the Constitution. The Constitution does become law, with a couple of caveats and compromises that we're going to get into in Chapter 10. But ultimately, this Constitution, the Constitution of the United States, does replace the Articles of Confederation. Is it a perfect document? No. However, it does prove to be one of the most successful documents in the history of human civilization, and it has lasted for 230 years as the reigning document and guiding force of the United States of America. Your last question there is more trivia than anything. What two... Never mind. This used to be a question on the sheet. It's no longer a question on the sheet. But New York City and Philadelphia acted as the country's national capitals until Washington, D.C. took the role in 1800, which we will talk about very soon in class. Hopefully this short video, it is 8 minutes long, was able to help you answer questions 7 through 11 on the handout. I will be checking this on Friday. I'll see if there's any clarifying questions in class. Remember that the copy of this PowerPoint is also in the Google Classroom for you to peruse and look at if you need it. But if you need me, let me know. Thank you for listening and watching, and I'll see you guys in class. Take care.